Welcome to the Fast Food Legend podcast. My name is Sam, and every week I will be sharing with you my latest essays about fast food. There is a brief silence between each essay. If you like my podcast, please subscribe, like, and most importantly, share it with someone else you think would like it. Thank you for your continued support of my work. Here is today's episode. This room, photographed without pretense or curatorial intervention, offers a blunt meditation on consumption's afterlife. Here, the walls do not bear family photos or aspirational artwork. They bear witness to flavor campaigns. This is not decoration. It is devotion. The three fast food posters are less advertisements than secular frescoes. They recall the wall works of Raoul Hadorf, or the taxonomic compulsions of Vahap Avshar's Lost Shadows, yet with none of the archival anxiety, only immediacy. Ghost pepper sandwich flames at the center like a martyred tongue, its $4.99 price point encircled in sacred blue. The crisp apple and tart cranberry flanks the scene with seasonal ephemerality, while the flounder fish sandwich tethers the visual rhythm in a cold, ecclesial blue that's nearly penitential. This is a room where nothing is hidden. The LUCID mattress lies flush to the ground, bearing its brand name like a patient file. The LED lights above don't romanticize, they underscore. They wrap the perimeter like a forensic contour, a sculptural neon drawing around the site of appetite's residue. What bed was ever more honestly named than lucid, a space where nothing is obscured by frame or elevation? We might read the room as a soft installation, one where the domestic and the corporate meet without mediation. The body, unrepresented, haunts the frame through the scattered charging cables, the low bedding, the open space of floor, as if presence has been flattened into a kind of caloric aura. It evokes the psychic minimalism of Josue Mejia's Inhabitable Utopias, or the food spirit apparitions of Therese Mastroiakovo's late notebook pieces. And yet what stays with us is not the bed, but the wall. These posters are not memorabilia. They are votives, contemporary ex-votos for a hunger that is less physical than ontological, a hunger for presence, for price, for limited time offers, for something, anything to choose. This room does not eat different. It eats only. This promotional image for Tangerine Passion Fuel, an advertisement for Black Rock Coffee Bar, operates within the broader tradition of American commercial portraiture while borrowing liberally from the aesthetic vocabulary of both post-digital branding and the vernacular graphic arts. Ostensibly a celebration of a limited edition beverage, the image reveals itself, under closer study, as a tightly choreographed meditation on identity, pleasure, and the commodified exuberance of the influencer era. At its center is Avery Woods, a figure framed not only by the bold orange color field behind her, but also by a constellation of curated symbols that encode her presence as both person and persona. Her eyes are closed, and her mouth is open in mid-laughter, a classic gesture in contemporary influencer iconography, evoking authenticity, unposed joy, and what Roland Barthes might have called the punctum of spontaneous emotion. In fact, this pose has roots in mid-century fashion photography, yet it has here been reanimated to serve a quasi-theatrical sincerity tailored for mobile-first consumption. Across the image, graphic design becomes symbolic environment. The bubble letter typography of Tangerine Passion floats above her head in an arrangement that deliberately blends the saccharine with the bombastic. The heart used to dot the I in Tangerine is a particularly telling detail. Its inclusion is not just a flourish, but a glyph of personalization, a kind of pseudo-handwriting that collapses mass production into an illusion of bespoke care. This sentiment is echoed in the text, crafted with love by Avery Woods, rendered in a whimsical script and concluded with a stylized signature. The use of a signature in advertising is always semiotically loaded. It suggests endorsement, yes, but also authorship, intimacy, and creative agency. We are invited not simply to consume the drink, but to participate in Wood's aura, to share a sip of her emotional capital. The word cheers hovers faintly on the right-hand side in a decorative script, nearly ghosted into the background. It's a term that historically connotes communal toasts, but here, isolated and slightly translucent, it functions more like a phantom echo of celebration, a word that must be intuited as much as read. It reinforces the image's performative invitation to celebrate, though we are alone in doing so, peering into a simulacrum of festivity. Behind Woods, the background stars shimmer in various registers. Some mimic the five-pointed sparkle shapes familiar from 90s mall brand cosmetics, while others resemble lens flares or sunbursts. These multiple styles of radiance suggest a layered temporality, evoking both childhood nostalgia and digital era dazzle. Notably, there are also two large red hearts diffused into the orange background, just above her head and near the left margin, unmistakable signifiers of warmth, emotionality, and affection. They frame her like a secular halo, producing a low-grade hagiography of the modern lifestyle saint. Woods herself is stylized not only by her expression and stance, but by her jewelry and tattoos, two personal adornments that carry long art historical shadows. The tattoos, partly visible on her arms, connote a curated identity, one that is expressive and inked with permanence. In contrast, her necklace and bracelets, especially the gold tones, signal control, polish, and intention, qualities often historically coded as feminine poise or glamour. In this way, her body becomes a layered archive of visual signs, evoking both rebellion and refinement, mass accessibility and unique persona. The drink she holds, cupped in one hand, features the Black Rock Coffee Bar logo, a utilitarian all-caps design printed on the transparent surface of the cup. Its positioning is clear but discreet, reminding the viewer of the product's origin without overwhelming the visual field. The logo stands in stark contrast to the fluidity of the surrounding script fonts, asserting itself as the corporate anchor in an otherwise affect-driven tableau. Indeed, this image choreographs emotion with such precision that one might trace its lineage to corporate pop surrealism, but with the ironic detachment sanded off. Instead, what we are left with is brand sincerity through visual saturation, a modern air to the synthetic optimism of mid-century color advertising filtered through the performative intimacy of the influencer economy. In this way, the image does not just sell a beverage, it sells a moment, a mood, and an identity, distilled, effervescent, and sweetened for maximum engagement. Let's have a look at this breakfast display from a Chester's Chicken. The image is deceptively simple, 6 metal trays arranged in a commercial warming case, each holding a modest portion of breakfast. Bacon, point. Sausage patties, biscuits, fried eggs, all evenly spaced, period. All lit with the sterile glow of utility. No steam, no movement, no people, just food, on pause. But this isn't just a visual record of a breakfast offering. It's a tableau of early 21st century transactional culture. It's a still life of systems. Dot. Culinary. Architectural. Economic. Here, Chester's does not present breakfast as experience, but as inventory. Each item is portioned, prearranged, isolated. What's displayed isn't a meal. It's the idea of readiness, a promise of heat, a suggestion of sustenance. There is an undeniable stillness to the scene, one that echoes the deadpan aesthetics of 1960s conceptual photography. Bernd and Hillebecker's typologies come to mind, or Ed Ruscha's images of parking lots and gas stations. This breakfast case, like those works, is less about appetite and more about observation. It invites viewers to look without being invited to engage. Nothing here seduces. The eggs, uneven and fragmented, sit on their parchment like a statement of minimum viability. The biscuits look durable. The bacon, curled but color correct, seems sculptural in its artificial neatness. Importantly, the image is behind glass. That barrier becomes symbolic. This is not breakfast as warmth or community. This is breakfast as infrastructure. It is food you do not touch, only select. It has more in common with vending than with cooking. And that glass, clean, clinical, almost refractive, separates not just the viewer from the food, but the food from meaning. We don't know where this is located, but we know exactly where this is located. Period. A truck stop. Dot. A highway plaza. Dot. A convenience corner on the way to somewhere else. The architecture of the case, the tray liners, the even lighting, every element is designed to communicate consistency across time and place. This is not regional. This is procedural. And that is the quiet tension of the image. Period. It speaks the language of carelessness, yet demands to be looked at carefully. It is forgettable by design, but unforgettable in its starkness. Like the Chester's bandana, or the empty dining room, or the mural filled with yearning cheeses steaks, this breakfast display is part of a larger visual thesis. The aesthetics of the in-between. Not hunger, not satisfaction. Just availability. Under the fluorescent haze of a church's chicken, somewhere off a feeder road in suburban Texas or Georgia or maybe Louisiana. It barely matters. The corporate dreamscape of fried poultry and soda bright sugar glows against the dull institutional blue of a laminated countertop. Above it all, the LED-lit menu screens hum with the low electric anxiety of early 21st century commercial design, an aesthetic not so much imagined as algorithmically assembled. Combo meals flank house favorites, flank value deals, each photograph saturated to the edge of believability, the food rendered in a palette not found in nature but in snack food R&D labs and outdated Adobe presets. The lighting is too white, the air too still, the mood too static to be comforting. It's the aesthetic of suspended decline. Less fast food than foreclosure cuisine. The entire restaurant reads like a stage set abandoned mid-performance. There's a plastic bag where a chair should be, handwritten notes taped to machinery, a broom half leant against a fryer, abandoned as if the user were raptured or just too tired to care. Behind the counter, the equipment is clean in the way institutional surfaces are clean. Not sanitized, but scraped down, the labor of bare necessity rather than pride. One has the sense that time doesn't quite pass here, it simply accrues. Layers of forgotten promotional stickers, obsolete point-of-sale instructions, and the ever-present drone of a soda fountain repeating the same carbonated hiss like a minimalist composition for the underemployed. But among the detritus and corporate overdesign, there is one moment of stunning, unintentional poetry. A sign that reads, "Dreams do come true." Positioned just above a photo of a honey butter biscuit, the slogan is rendered in a bright yellow gradient that echoes lottery tickets and prosperity gospel leaflets. The typeface is unremarkable, but the phrase is disarming in its syntax. Flat, declarative, pious. It gestures toward something grander than its context permits. There is no irony here, no postmodern knowingness. The dream is literal. You can have this biscuit. maybe even two. In another setting, the phrase might have been appropriated into the visual language of a Claire Fontaine or Jill Magyid, those artists who understood how slogans could both reflect and weaponize consumer language. But here, dreams do come true is not critique. It is confession. It is the distilled essence of the transactional sublime, where wish fulfillment is reduced to something handheld and edible. That biscuit stands in for all manner of dreams denied elsewhere. Economic stability, emotional security, purpose. You cannot afford to own property or maybe even a new car. But for 79 cents, you can briefly participate in the fantasy of abundance. The absurdity is that the sign doesn't feel absurd. It's not funny, not kitsch. It's melancholic. It's hopeful. It believes itself. And that belief, the idea that a dream could still mean something, even in a place like this, is what elevates the moment into something almost tragic. Because, of course, the dream already came true. You're standing in it. The building, the biscuit, the menu. All of it is the realization of a corporate fantasy dreamed up in a boardroom decades ago. And now it's here. Flickering, slightly cracked, but still operational. Churches, in this instance, doesn't offer a meal so much as it stages a performance of early 21st century aspiration. Flattened, standardized, mass-distributed, and finally reduced to a sugary pastry product posing as transcendence. This isn't failure exactly. It's a dream deferred by design, and in that deferral, something honest, something genuinely moving, leaks out from between the seams of a menu board too bright to read and a biscuit too sweet to finish. There's something quietly brutal about the church's chicken restaurant hours sign, a document that announces time as if it were barely under control. It sits in the corner of the restaurant like a bureaucratic relic, its blank drive-through section beneath the completed dining room grid hanging like an unfinished thought. The typography tries its best to appear confident, blocky, bold, and full of resolve. But the hand-filled times, vague and repetitive. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Evoke a kind of existential shrug. The repetition of hours, 10 to 11, 10 to 11, day after day, doesn't suggest efficiency or stability, but stagnation, a life run on autopilot. These aren't business hours so much as a loop, a mechanical return to the same thresholds of time, devoid of punctuation, meaning, or seasonal adjustment. The dot after the time, 10 o'clock, period, instead of 10 o'clock, reads like an ellipsis pretending to be a period, a pause that went too far. Above all this, the phrase, "No solicitation please," hovers like a threat half-dressed as civility. It's the visual equivalent of a broom left across the doorway, an object meant to keep something or someone out, though it's never quite clear who. The implied request isn't simply about solicitation, it's about boundaries, about the labor of the space being maintained just barely enough to function, but not enough to invite real presence or interruption. And just below the sign, the real poetry begins, a chipped metal ledge worn down by the leaning elbows of countless customers and workers. Layers of black, beige, and primer peek through like a Rothko stripped of any transcendence. It is material exhaustion, institutional fatigue made visible. In the totality of this image, Churches does not appear as a business with operating hours, but as a set of performances on a broken clock. The times are posted not to inform, but to reassure. The restaurant is open, or will be, or might be. Either way, time, like the biscuits, is something best served warm, but ultimately handled with indifference. This image captures the interior of a Jollibee location, an environment shaped less by nostalgia and more by the legacy of mid-20th century modernism, filtered through late-century retail pragmatism. The architectural language recalls the international style's emphasis on functional clarity. Note the clean rectilinear lines of the counters, the modular seating units, and the repeated cylindrical light fixtures. Yet where high modernism would have insisted on austerity, Jollibee infuses its space with color as affect. Bold vermilion and mango orange tones provide warmth and rhythm in an otherwise utilitarian volume. The suspended red drum pendants, scaled with intention, act almost as architectonic punctuation, visually breaking up the ceiling plane and offering a pop formalism reminiscent of the 1960s Italian radical design movement. Designers such as Ettore Sottsass might have appreciated the exuberant geometries, though here they are stripped of irony and repurposed as branding infrastructure. Balloon clusters, while ephemeral, operate visually as soft interventions, echoing Yayoi Kusama's playful seriality, or even the festive weightlessness of Pipilotti Rist's installations, albeit in a drastically commercial register. They float above the diners like punctuation marks in a manufactured celebration, not quite kitsch, but choreographed joviality. What emerges is a corporate vernacular, rooted in the tropes of global fast food architecture, but distinctively localized through palette and pattern. The space suggests an environment optimized for repetition, of meals, of motion, of signage, yet it gestures faintly towards communal joy. This is high-volume hospitality interpreted through the aesthetics of approachable futurism, as filtered through the pressures of speed and brand consistency. Rather than historicizing itself like a faux diner might, Jollibee's interior adopts the visual codes of post-Fordist efficiency, softened by a palette that hints at warmth without indulging in sentimentality. It is above all designed to be remembered not as a place, but as a feeling, a brief encounter with orchestrated cheer wrapped in laminate. This Jollibee storefront serves as a compelling study in commercial facade design as vernacular monument. The architecture is function first, boxy, modular, and stripped of all superfluity, and yet its interplay of color, material, and symbolic presence situates it squarely within a longer visual tradition that spans Bauhaus pragmatism, pop-influenced branding, and the aesthetics of diaspora architecture. The most striking element here is the assertive red panel that bifurcates the building's face, acting both as visual anchor and chromatic declaration. Red in Southeast Asian visual traditions often connotes joy, energy, and fortune, and in this context, it aligns with the name Chicken Joy emblazoned across the top fascia. Paired with the stylized bee, smiling, beckoning, cartoonish, this space announces its identity before one even registers its function. The geometric clarity of the structure recalls the rationalist storefront typologies of post-war urbanism, where form followed not only function, but franchising. Yet Jollibee introduces a softness, the rounded letter forms of the signage, the playfulness of the mascot, and the punctuating red canopy. These infuse the rationalist box with a distinctly effective language. This is not corporate anonymity, it is brand locality rendered in architectural form. There's also a subtle reference here to the aesthetic strategies of mid-century American roadside culture, wherein businesses deployed exaggerated symbols to catch the eye of passing cars. The bee statue to the left of the entrance takes on a totemic role, a 21st century update to the fiberglass beacons of an earlier era, evoking the spirit, if not the scale, of pop assemblage artists like Marisol Escobar, who fused figuration and signage to comment on identity and consumption. Finally, we might view the structure as a kind of diasporic pavilion, not built to impress, but to anchor community memory through familiarity. Like the tricolor flag of a nation, the red-beige-black palette does more than decorate. It signifies. It's an effective landmark, a declaration that fast food, too, can be freighted with meaning beyond calories. It becomes architecture as cultural signal, a functional temple of taste, nostalgia, and identity. This interior of a Jollibee restaurant presents a fascinating contemporary articulation of post-pop commercial muralism, filtered through the lens of emphatic joy and a kind of performative optimism. The space is orchestrated around a sweeping wall graphic, a choreographic diagram of the Jollibee mascot executing the twist, rendered in exuberant poses with clearly labeled steps. It is both instructional and spectacular, a wall-sized visual dance card. From a historical vantage, this mural continues a lineage that stretches back to Mexican social realism, albeit stripped of all political gravitas, and filtered through the vernacular signage traditions of Filipino commercial art. This is not Rivera, but it does share a compositional clarity and didactic intent. Here, not labor, but branded joy is the subject of collective engagement. The mascot itself is treated not as icon, but protagonist, caught in a sequence akin to futurist motion studies, or even Duchamp's Nude. Descending a staircase, number 2. If that work were rendered in flat color, cheerful vector lines, and rendered in B costume, the steps, 1 shake your bottom, 2 turn in place. Propose dance not just as activity, but as ritualized behavior, akin to the ceremonial codes once embedded in temple friezes or church murals. The surrounding interior architecture is decidedly muted. Cool gray floors, unadorned tabletops, rectilinear seating. This provides a stage-like neutrality, making the mural a focal plane of energy and motion. The spatial logic recalls early constructivist cafe interiors, where design served to choreograph the viewer's gaze and behavior. There's also a striking use of color logic. The bold cerulean background contrasts vibrantly with the warm reds and yellows of the Jollibee costume and furniture accents. This triadic palette reinforces brand color hierarchy, while echoing classic color field strategies found in post-war abstraction, only here rechanneled into the realm of food service. Ultimately, this mural's value lies not in depth, but in surface affect. It is a wall that doesn't ask to be interpreted, only enacted, a call to movement, to mimicry, and to communal levity. In that, it shares surprising common ground with the pedagogical environments of early modernist kindergartens, where play became the mode of instruction. Here, too, play is the pedagogy, and dancing the curriculum. This image captures the counter-interior of a Kewpie Hamburger's location, whose visual logic is saturated with a very specific form of regional modernism, the kind practiced not by architects and theorists, but by commercial designers across the American Midwest from the post-war period into the 1970s. It is a preserved instance of what Rainer Banham might have called a vernacular technostructure, utilitarian, unself-conscious, but strangely meticulous in its aesthetic. The overall composition is defined by a strict horizontal symmetry, with the ordering counter acting as a kind of pictorial plinth. The laminated surface, framed in wood trim panels, evokes the stylings of post-war diner culture, but rendered here in a more subdued Protestant register. Above, the menu boards and wall-mounted ship wheels punctuate the space with a kind of visual signage rhythm, functioning less as navigational tools and more as domestic reliquaries of seafood nostalgia. Most striking, though, is the plastic baby doll on the upper left ledge, an uncanny insertion that transforms the space from mere retro-modernist holdover into something bordering on American surrealism. It's a gesture that, knowingly or not, conjures Joseph Cornell's box constructions, where innocence, fetish, and unease coexist in carefully composed microcosms. The presence of timepieces, one standard and one stylized into a ship's helm, offers a quiet nod to the temporality of labor, a fast food restaurant where the tracking of minutes carries economic and social weight. Yet their symmetry, paired with the glowing, aged menu boards, also creates a sense of ritual regularity, as though each meal is part of a communal liturgy. The red carpet tile underfoot, highly unusual in a fast food space, anchors the scene in the material warmth of 1970s civic architecture, not unlike the lobbies of public libraries or bank branches of the same period. There is no irony in this aesthetic, only the earnest design of utility. Taken together, the effect is not nostalgic, but archival, as if this QP is a living museum of an alternative modernism, untouched by branding consultants or algorithmic layout optimization. Its visual vocabulary speaks of a time when American fast food still bore traces of human authorship, idiosyncratic, local, quietly strange. This image presents two pieces of branded packaging from QP Hamburgers, a white paper cup and a brown craft bag, both adorned with a stylized infant figure that harkens directly to Rose O'Neill's early 20th century QP illustrations. These visual elements form a rare continuity between commercial ephemera and turn-of-the-century American illustration, preserving a specific figural tradition that most franchises have long abandoned in favor of more generic design language. The child figure, rendered in a clean, almost Linnacut style on the bag, is surrounded by an exuberant radial of text, clean, sweet, plump, pretty, alongside the remarkable corporate slogan, "We cater to all the folks." This ensemble evokes early advertising's fascination with idealized domesticity, not unlike the packaging aesthetics of the early Quaker Oats boxes or Campbell's soup labels. It's a form of commercial utopianism, the idea that character, flavor, and wholesomeness are bound together in both design and diet. The phrase "Hamburg pickle on top makes your heart go flippity-flop" reappears as a kind of oral folk poetry, drawing its energy from mid-century advertising jingles and the optimistic linguistic play of Depression-era Americana. One could compare this to the rhythmic vernacular of Hannah Höchst's collage work, where visual fragments collide with slogans to produce a satirical but earnest whole. Though here, the tone is not ironic, but charmingly naive. Typographically, the word QP is rendered in an exuberant script, with the looped K resembling a child's scrawl, again emphasizing the brand's embrace of visual innocence as identity. It's a mode of branding not seen since the first half of the 20th century, when logos still bore a narrative character and were meant to signal loyalty as much as recognition. In art historical terms, this packaging might be placed alongside the American arts and crafts movement's interests in childlike purity and domestic design, filtered through a distinctly Midwestern filter. Its preservation into the present is less a revival than a kind of accidental archivalism, an unbroken line between antique figuration and contemporary consumption still stubbornly in circulation. The exterior of this QP Hamburgers location, aglow under sodium vapor parking lot lights, presents a near pristine example of mid-century American vernacular architecture. With its squat trapezoidal yellow roof and wraparound glass enclosure, the structure could easily be mistaken for a 1960s bank or early McDonald's. And indeed, This architectural language is not coincidental, but directly descended from the rise of roadside modernism that followed World War II. What makes this facade distinctive is its radial symmetry and roof-dominant silhouette, which places it in line with the Googie tradition, an aesthetic that merged futurist optimism with commercial pragmatism, especially prevalent in the California car culture of the 1950s. Think of Helen Liu Fong's work for Armet and Davis, or the later exaggerated geometries of Wayne McAllister, both champions of the idea that a building should be legible at 50 miles per hour. The signage, meanwhile, retains the hand-drawn figuration of the Kewpie doll, a motif so anachronistic in contemporary branding that it now reads almost as outsider art. Here, the figure's persistence across the decades turns the restaurant itself into a kind of living reliquary of pre-digital Americana, one that has resisted both rebranding and the logic of the global franchise. From an art historical perspective, this preservation of form and iconography signals not nostalgia, but a kind of resistance to erasure, echoing the ethos of regionalist painters like Thomas Hart Benton, or even the post-pop assemblages of H.C. Westermann, who similarly grappled with the iconography of the Midwest under threat. Altogether, this Kewpie location reads not merely as a fast food outpost, but as an accidental monument to the aesthetics of Main Street, part streamlined moderne, part folk semiotics, and entirely untouched by the sterilizing hand of corporate redesign. This interior corner at Kewpie Hamburgers offers an unintentional yet profound encounter with Americana's deeply uncanny register. Mounted above the booth is a large, molded figure of the original Kewpie doll, a mascot derived from Rose O'Neill's early 20th century cherubic illustrations, which first appeared in the Ladies' Home Journal in 1909. Her work, charming yet saccharine, was influential in the development of character merchandising, predating even Mickey Mouse. In this fast food context, however, the figure becomes something else entirely. Here, elevated in a semi-lit alcove with outstretched arms and stylized gaze, the doll resembles a votive figure, not unlike the naively sacred sculptures of early American folk art, or, more pointedly, the emotionally ambiguous children cast in Balthus's post-war paintings. The gloss of the red booths and the segmented aluminum strips that ring the interior evoke a kind of modest, streamlined modern purity, reinforcing the liminality of the figure's presence. It is a relic of pre-digital consumer innocence suspended in a space built for speed. From a historiographic perspective, this sculptural inclusion offers an exceptional example of what art historian Mi-Won Kwon might call site-specific branding, in which the artwork, or in this case, mascot, is not merely decorative, but enacts a spatial claim, embedding corporate identity into architectural experience. Unlike contemporary mascots, the Kewpie retains its original bodily form, and the lack of stylization or abstraction heightens its uncanny effect, a throwback that resists the hyper-cuteness of later character design, such as that seen in early 21st century East Asian branding. In short, the presence of this figure is less nostalgic than surreal. It is a cultural artifact embedded in the architecture, a childlike sentinel that renders this unassuming diner booth an installation, half Warholian ready-made, half Midwestern shrine. The burger in this image presents an almost uncanny flatness, not simply in its physical profile, but in its symbolic compression. The bun lies soft and visibly deflated, its dome barely rising above the patty like a collapsed monument. Visually, the burger is closer to a print than a sculpture, echoing the aesthetic strategies of early pop artists such as Sister Mary Corita Kent, who embraced flatness as a democratic gesture, collapsing hierarchies between image and message, high and low. This is a burger that does not aspire to monumentality. It rejects the vertical exuberance typical of gourmet fast food photography, the towering stacks, the theatrical melts, the voluptuous lettuce curls. Instead, what we see here is compressed Americana, visually parallel to the flattened architecture of Midwestern strip malls or the deadpan paintings of Dwayne Hanson's faux fast food patrons. It's not just flat. It's poignantly uninflated. The texture of the beef patty, by contrast, is expressive. Irregular and charred, it offers a subtle tactility against the smoothness of the bun, suggesting a kind of material honesty. But even that is constrained within the overall visual field, subdued by the surrounding stillness. The burger becomes emblematic of a broader ethos: modesty, utility, refusal of spectacle. In art historical terms, this could be understood as a late echo of precisionism, where the machine-made and the hand-wrought meet in silent geometries. Here, however, the precision is unintentional. It's not stylized, but functional, economic, and entirely unadorned. A sandwich is still life, but without drama. A burger as print. This dining room interior evokes a kind of civic austerity that is deeply rooted in post-war Midwestern pragmatism. The red booths and chairs are uniformly arranged, resembling not so much a place of leisure as a cafeteria engineered for efficiency. There is a purity here, flat surfaces, uninterrupted lines, and a chromatic discipline that might recall the reductive environments painted by artists like John Zurier, or the spatial coolness of West Coast light and space practices. But unlike those traditions which sought transcendence through reduction, this space is unapologetically utilitarian. The visual logic is modular. Rectilinear forms in vinyl, laminate, and linoleum converge without ornament. What emerges is a democratic geometry, flattened in its visual depth, yet open in its function. In that sense, the room becomes less a nod to minimalism and more a cousin to the bureaucratic environments celebrated in the photographs of Thomas Demand. Spaces devoid of human drama, yet saturated with social infrastructure. Even the menu boards, framed tightly above the counter, participate in this grid logic, echoing the post-purist formalism of the 1960s. Yet there's something stubbornly American about it. The red chairs, the imitation wood grain, the high-friction tile. It is the architecture of endurance, not aspiration. In short, this Kewpie dining room performs a kind of spatial realism. It neither seduces nor distracts. It simply is, and in doing so, it quietly resists the theatricality of contemporary design with a functional flatness that feels, in its own right, almost radical. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme, what leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape? Of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady, what men or gods are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal yet, do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss, for ever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting, and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, lead'st thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of this folk, this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate, can e'er return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with braid of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou silent form dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou say'st, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all. Ye know on earth and all ye need to know. There is a strange, compelling authority to the McDonald's roadside sign, and in this particular instance, where the golden arches loom above a stark declaration, "Snack Wrap is back, you won," that authority is both punctured and reinforced. It is not merely an advertisement, but a gesture, a cultural artifact whose unassuming modular typography intersects with mass longing and the theater of corporate surrender. This piece, found in the wild rather than within the sterile walls of a white cube, is a ready-made that speaks louder than most curated installations. The letterboard utilizes a typographic style that is function first, likely Helvetica or a similar model, engineered for readability, modularity, and mechanical application. Its flat, utilitarian uniformity has long served the ambitions of corporate America, speaking in a tone of bureaucratic neutrality. Yet here, that very neutrality is weaponized for affect. Each all-caps letter appears evenly spaced and coldly distant, a quality that imbues the text with a kind of institutional finality, as if this were not a fast food chain, but a governmental proclamation. The act of using black letters on a yellow background is itself a typographic echo of highway signage, caution tape, or hazard warnings. Attention is not just invited, it is demanded. Typography is not merely the vessel of the message, it is the message. And within this rigid grid of changeable letters is a subtle choreography. We are trained to read such signs quickly, in passing, under overcast skies or blazing sun, in drive-through queues or commuter traffic. But this text, however sparse, lingers. There is an intimacy in its brevity. A statement of return, "Snack Wrap is back," immediately subverted by the second line, "You won." The language feigns concession, feigns warmth, feigns dialogue, but it is never more than typographic performance, just plastic letters in a groove. The absurdity lies precisely in that tension. If we follow Roland Barthes' view of signs as layered with denotation and connotation, then the denotative reading is straightforward. McDonald's has reinstated a once discontinued product, the snack wrap, and the sign communicates this. But the connotation is trickier and more interesting. "You won" is not merely celebratory, it is a sly capitulation, a meme-like confession that the giant has bent to the will of its public. It is faux democracy, and it knows it. This is where the piece's semiotic power begins to resemble the work of contemporary conceptual artists like Sable Elise Smith, whose practice involves recontextualizing institutional aesthetics, prison signage, courtroom transcripts, into ambiguous moral spaces. The McDonald's sign, like Smith's work, balances familiarity with latent violence. "You won" is ironic. Who wins when processed nostalgia is fed back to us as triumph? More than a sign, this is a confessional, one which invites the viewer to recall their own complicity in mass desire. Here, the language is not even selling something, it is selling being heard, and this is a far more persuasive transaction. The corporation, faceless and monolithic, dons the mask of the people. This sign, viewed through the lens of 20th and 21st century art history, finds kinship in the work of K. Rosen, whose practice involves the linguistic subversion of common phrases rendered in formal lettering. Like Rosen, the sign employs banality as a smokescreen. The language is minimal, but the affect is not. It also echoes the ethos of Sharon Hayes, whose performances and installations explore political language and its fragmentation. Hayes often quotes or misquotes speeches, presenting them out of context in public spaces. Similarly, the phrase "you won" is detached from any tangible victory. It becomes an empty mantra, all triumph and no context. And then there's Michael Rakowitz, whose work reconstructs destroyed artifacts of cultural heritage. While Rakowitz's practice is rooted in memory, history, and trauma, this roadside sign performs a similar, if shallower, gesture, a resurrection. It brings back not an ancient statue, but the snack wrap, a totem of late capitalist comfort food, and positions its return as an act of historical importance. That this sign exists outside, probably in a suburban or exurban American landscape, is integral. It draws upon the vernacular of roadside Americana, itself a visual tradition steeped in speed, disposability, and architectural brutalism. The sign is a spatial punctuation mark, breaking the monotony of drive lanes, parking lots, and curb cuts. It is not framed by gallery walls, but by telephone wires and hedge lines. The sky above is an aggressive blue, suggesting the midday clarity of western sprawl. Against it, the plastic yellow arcs of the golden arches pierce upward like an ideogram for consumption. And yet this too has become kitsch, part of the historical sediment of fast food iconography, equal parts pop art and fossil. Ultimately, this McDonald's sign, in its typographic bluntness and faux populist language, is a small but potent monument to the current era's consumer affect. It is a sculptural poem, a ready-made pamphlet of mediated victory, an open letter disguised as a closed system. It may not claim to be art, but it enacts the gestures of art with unconscious precision, one plastic character at a time. And in doing so, it situates itself, however briefly, within the lineage of artists who understand the politics of the mundane, the performance of signage, and the bittersweet theater of return. Set against softly grained wood veneer and flanked by a hallway as blank as an Ellsworth Kelly panel, the Starbucks merchandise shelf becomes less a commercial fixture and more a study in controlled opacity. We are presented not with a marketplace, but with a taxonomy. Rows of bagged coffee in chromatic sequence, ochres, cobalts, ambers, wines, recall the systematizing logic of 18th century natural history cabinets or the paintbox flats of Morandi, if Morandi had worked under LED spotlights and loyalty incentives. There is a near-classical clarity to the shelving's organization. In fact, it calls to mind the grands ensembles of post-war France, as analyzed by architects like Henri Siriani and Aldo van Eyck, the strict geometry of containment offset by humanist appeal. What was once housing becomes packaging, And just as Le Corbusier imagined the machine for living, here we encounter a machine for pausing, sipping, acquiring. This is the domestic scaled down and rendered in brushed metal. The tumblers themselves are arrayed as a study in objecthood, glinting with glazes, grips, and lids. They serve as micro-monuments to late-stage hydration. The palette shifts from matte black to a lavender so faint it approaches the atmospheric interiors of a Wilhelm Hammershøi painting. These are not cups. These are effective props, aspirational prosthetics within the visual economy of caffeinated ritual. Yet if we peer beneath the aesthetic calm, we encounter another structure, the triangulated network of labor, logistics, and repetition. Note the 2 cardboard boxes in the rear room, left open, legible, matter of fact. Their presence breaks the illusion. In art historical terms, this moment functions as a vanitas, not an iconographic content, but in its insertion of the backstage into the showroom. It is a gesture worthy of Claes Oldenburg's backroom interventions, or even the late institutional critiques of Joe Spence. There is also the balloon, green, mylar, accidental. It hovers like an uninvited Calder, introducing levity into a scene that otherwise traffics in precision. One cannot say whether it is festive or ominous, and that ambiguity is the entire point. It performs the role of the trace, the remainder of an opening, a celebration, or a mistake no one has fixed. It is both leftover and intervention, like a Dan Graham mirror pavilion infiltrated by a child's party. This installation, and it is an installation, asks nothing and offers everything. It functions on the level of the contemporary vitrine, part museum display, part tactical branding, but its true power lies in its denial of choice. Everything here is for sale, but nothing here is necessary. In that sense, the Starbucks shelf becomes a quiet monument to the postmodern condition, ornamental, optimized, and utterly indifferent to our gaze. One enters this Starbucks not so much to consume as to be suspended, in a moment of aspirational neutrality, nestled between the soft gleam of polished concrete and the warm diplomatic tones of engineered walnut. The seating arrangement is diagrammatic, almost instructional. Pairs of round cafe tables, accompanied by molded plywood chairs and leather-upholstered stools, spaced with the discipline of an early Saul LeWitt wall drawing. Sociality is planned, but not enforced. Conversation is possible, but never urgent. On the north wall, a large mural dominates, a rectilinear canvas populated with glyphic motifs, bridges, parachutes, smokestacks, water towers, tugboats, and domes, each rendered in desaturated desert tones, with hard edges and zero line weight. The piece reads like a pacified descendant of the Bauhaus graphic tradition, a kind of softened constructivism filtered through a corporate hospitality committee. One can trace a faint lineage from El Lisitsky's Prown Room to this suburban mural, though the ideological temperature has dropped considerably. The iconography of infrastructure, bridges, pulleys, ducts, echoes a machine-age optimism, but here it is without friction, abstraction's blunt forms used not to provoke, but to pacify. The mural's flatness is not just formal, it is effective. It projects the same passive charisma as the air-conditioned lounge or the laminated airport chapel. And yet it is precisely this soft formalism, this refusal to assert urgency, that aligns it with the deeper history of interstitial spaces, the waiting room, the post office, the Swiss railway kiosk, that 20th century design often left untouched. The leather chairs, cognac-colored, deliberately low, summon the ghost of Knoll's contract modernism, though robbed of its executive aggression. They are sculpture-adjacent, but emphatically usable. One is reminded unexpectedly of Lina Bo Bardi's seating for the MASP in Sao Paulo, not in form, but in function. Objects designed to humanize a glass and steel frame. And then there is the partitioned use of materials: vertical wood cladding, white beadboard, matte black aluminum mullions, all stylistic citations carefully scrubbed of risk. This is not brutalism, it is not minimalism, it is the echo of both, rendered digestible, like the interior of a Norman Foster airport imagined by someone who has never flown. In that sense, this Starbucks operates as a kind of non-place with architectural ambition. Its ambition is not to be remembered, but to be repeatable. To sit here is to inhabit a calm derived from design, a serenity that is not natural but manufactured, like Agnes Martin viewed through the logic of upholstery. The mural says nothing. The space does not insist. But together they extend a quiet thesis. That meaning, when flattened into icon and embedded in birch veneer, need not declare itself. It can simply suggest comfort, system, and the possibility of staying still. At first glance, the scene might register as mere design, but linger for more than a moment, and it reveals itself as something subtler, slower, a meditation in walnut stain and tonal restraint. In this Starbucks, the rhetoric of third space becomes, if not ideology, then at least diagram. Social aspiration mapped across a grid of neutral palettes, echoed in oak veneer and matte black beams. The wall display functions as a domesticized salon hang, composed of photographic prints, typographic miniatures, and abstracted agricultural imagery. But despite its eclectic content, the grid holds. This formal stability is critical. The entire arrangement echoes the pedagogical display techniques of early 20th century German Werkbund exhibitions, where manufacturing and moral order were collapsed into gridded aesthetics. Yet here the moralism has been ironed out. What remains is a flattening serenity, as though all content had passed through a layer of frosted glass. That grid, it refuses monumentality, opting instead for legibility. This is not an artwork to be viewed in awe. It is an installation to be glanced at while waiting for a mobile order. Each component performs in the visual key of the understood: a leaf, a bean, a phrase, a farm. There is no trickery, no index of authorship. It is a space where pictures behave themselves. To the right, the architecture composes itself around modular rectilinearity. Glazing dominates, but not ostentatiously. It is merely there to let the landscape in, not to rival it. The seating, too, offers the unassuming elegance of mid-century Danish cafes: blonde wood, gentle tapers, and saddle tan upholstery, resolutely polite. The restraint suggests a distant kinship with Paul Kjærholm's investigations into functional decorum, though none of the ideological torque. This is Kjærholm on decaf. Most striking, perhaps, is the acoustic ceiling, black and louvered like a horizontal columbarium, which absorbs sound and consequence alike. It hovers overhead, quietly swallowing effect. Such ceilings have long existed in airport lounges and university lecture halls, but here they perform an architectural sleight of hand, lowering the temperature, softening the light, canceling the echo of the espresso machine. And yet, there's a gentleness to the total composition that resists critique. It is not trying to impress. It is not making a statement. It is simply trying to keep you just long enough to finish your drink. In this way, it calls to mind the quiet ambitions of mid-century exhibition design, particularly the work of Franco Albini or Yoshio Taniguchi. Spaces engineered not to celebrate the spectacular, but to frame the ordinary with uncommon grace. Here, the ordinary is sacred, if quietly so. The laptop, the plywood chair, the digital loyalty card. This is not the agora, nor is it the museum. It is something else entirely, a place where images rest and people pause, not to be changed, but simply not to be disturbed. There is a kind of calm violence in the Starbucks storefront, not in gesture, but in refusal. The refusal of adornment, the refusal of narrative, the refusal of overt invitation. What we see instead is a bifurcated facade rendered in two material registers, one in a warm, honeyed panel, likely synthetic, the other in a dark rectilinear brick. Each section is bound by a line of industrial black trim, boxing out the structure like a restrained elevation diagram drawn with mechanical precision. This aesthetic, somewhere between retail vernacular and diagrammatic modernism, descends not from Meiji rigor, but rather from the quasi-anthropological design language favored by early 21st century commercial architecture, a language of recognition, not revelation. One could liken its compositional clarity to the architect Rifat Chadirji's civic facades in Iraq during the 1960s, which often merged local materials with cool international geometries, though here the moral weight is absent. The Starbucks shell does not attempt synthesis. It performs segmentation. The logo, centrally mounted on the ochre box, functions not as signage, but as totem. Its placement is proportionally symmetrical and formally silent, echoing the compositional strategies of post-war institutional graphics. Think Stankowski's branding for Deutsche Bank, where legibility served as visual ethics. This is the kind of spatial rhetoric that favors brand as glyph, where language has been replaced by form and form by presence. The siren, surrounded by unbroken expanse, becomes less a figurehead and more a mark of authorized retreat. The juxtaposition of textures, the wood-like cladding and the narrow modular brick, deserves brief formal attention. These are not simply surfaces. They are signifiers of parallel truths. The ochre volume reads as warmth, craft, the ritual of pour-over. The black brick wall as permanence, durability, a kind of moral seriousness borrowed from institutional architecture. Together they form a diptych of brand aspirations, the artisanal and the infrastructural. There is, crucially, no spectacle, no kinetic signage, no play of reflection. The facade's minimal shadowing, most evident in the boxed soffit overhang, reads like a drawing detail rather than environmental effect. This is not a building that flirts with passing light. It absorbs it, returns it as subdued presence. The facade behaves. It recedes into its function. What's most compelling, however, is what isn't here: ornament, inscription, seasonal color. This absence is a posture. It aligns with a broader shift in commercial design aesthetics, post-2015, in which visibility became less about capturing attention than about maintaining dignity. The Starbucks, in this instance, becomes an architecture of neutrality, a building designed not to declare, but to continue. Like a museum storage room, it preserves the potential of experience without dictating it. That is its radicalism. In this latest tableau of transactional design, the Starbucks countertop display at once mimics the domestic pantry, the museum gift shop, and the frontispiece of a boutique grocer. More than a mere point-of-sale strategy, the composition assumes the guise of a curated vitrine, recalling the early assemblages of British constructivist John Spencer or the compositional restraint of Mary Martin's relief panels. But here, instead of modulated planes or serial geometries, we find gum, nuts, reusable cups. The layout adheres to a vertical zoning logic. The upper register, dominated by the two tall tumblers, anchors the structure like standing figures in a Piero della Francesca altarpiece. The tumblers are not props but protagonists, one pastel, translucent, with confetti-like specks suggesting festive futurism, the other stark, white, bearing the siren sigil, hermetic, formal, severe. Below them unfolds the taxonomy of the everyday. Spearmint gum adjacent to marshmallow bars, wellness-branded trail mixes flirting with kid-like indulgences, each item encased in a plastic carapace as if to protect their semiotic charge. We should not overlook the typography. Though intentionally uniform in its typographic register, the placards and packaging draw their heritage not from a singular graphic tradition, but from a tension between early 2000s, Whole Food semiotics, and the modular optimism of Bauhaus-era product labeling. The refusal to break hierarchy, every price, every title, centered and tidy, results in a kind of commercial monasticism. This is product as moral arrangement. Moreover, the entire ensemble is enclosed in transparent acrylic containers, forming what we might call a consumer reliquary. The display is not asking for interaction so much as contemplation. One sees but does not disturb. The grid does not invite, it instructs. This is a curated ethics of choice, not unlike the pedagogical framing systems employed by the independent group in post-war London, where form and content were subordinate to framing and context. The countertop itself, in pale synthetic stone, forms a base reminiscent of George Sugarman's lesser-known plinth experiments of the late 1960s, where elevation demarcated value but also set the stage for spatial negotiations between viewer and object. Here, too, the object, the snack, the straw, becomes not only thing to buy, but object to look at, to judge, to weigh in ethical terms. Organic? Vegan? Loud AF. The rhetoric of virtue and identity is not incidental, it is spatialized. This is not merely retail design, it is the staging of contemporary values as consumable, portable, giftable. It is a votive altar in a culture of ethical purchase, where the sacred is wrapped in foil and costs $2.79. It is also, it should be said, very well lit. What we encounter here is not a food display, but a grammar of edible modernism. Starbucks pastry and sandwich case becomes a vitrine of carefully curated mundanity, a transparent cabinet of contemporary appetites. The lineage stretches not from cuisine, but from the long history of display as both epistemic tool and aesthetic form. Echoes of the 17th century Wunderkammer resonate through the glass, not through rarity, but through order, or more precisely, a belief that order itself confers significance. The upper shelves read like a didactic frieze. Suspended pastries and sandwiches, spaced with an almost brutalist confidence, suggest a syntax not unlike that seen in Elisitsky's Prown rooms, where each unit sits within its own coordinate system. Here, however, the modules are not suprematist geometries, but bacon Gouda sandwiches, vegan pumpkin loaves, and defrosted croissants. Each is given an individual plinth and name card, arranged as if part of a teaching collection in a provincial design museum. But make no mistake, the hierarchy is real. There are things on view, and there are things on offer. Below, a chromatic shelf of hydration, canned sparkling water, bottled kombucha, boxed juices. This lower tier enacts a deliberate vertical demotion. We descend from the symbolic register of the pastry toward the functional substrate of liquid commodity. A beverage, after all, is not meant to be seen. Yet here they are, can after can, staged in repetition, the kind that inspired Bernd and Hillebecker's industrial typologies. It is architectural, taxonomic, and crucially refrigerated. The effect is one of enforced neutrality. The lighting is even, the palette subdued. These are foods made not for consumption, but for optical clarity. Their visibility is part of the transaction. This is a diet of transparency, literalized in the plexiglass, metaphorized in the labeling, and performed in the conspicuous absence of heat, steam, or scent. We are not meant to be seduced. We are meant to feel safe. One cannot help but consider the rise of didactic minimalism in retail environments post-2008, a gesture toward trust, control, and hygiene in the guise of aesthetics. The elevation of the egg bite, perched delicately in its ramekin like a solitary votive, becomes a symbol of the entire enterprise, stable, clean, bite-sized. It is the food equivalent of a restrained monoprint by Winifred Nicholson, pleasant, measured, and unmistakably part of a set. In this arrangement, every item is isolated. Yet this is not isolation in the emotional sense. It is museological. No item touches another. The implication: each product must stand alone, legible, tagged, and verified. This is not a case of nourishment, but of taxonomy, an edible archive, a calm, refrigerated ontology of light breakfast. Should we wish to read further into this mise-en-scène, we might consider the deep structural echo of Le Corbusier's 5 points of a new architecture. Transparency, grid, piloty, they are all here, transmuted through the language of retail logistics. But here, instead of reimagining urbanism, we are offered a chocolate cake pop, and perhaps that too is enough. The gallery wall in this Starbucks seating alcove presents a tightly curated visual thesis, a corporate pastoral in 9 movements. Each image, when read in isolation, offers a familiar trope: the red barn, the coffee cherries, the mist-drenched forest. But together they enact a quiet choreography of global sourcing, visual reassurance, and agrarian fantasy. This is not documentation. This is branding as Bildungsroman. We must begin with the wall itself. Walnut-toned paneling, museum lighting, and a mid-century olive banquette, all recalling the domestic modernism of Charles and Ray Eames's Pacific Palisades residence, not in form, but in spatial intimacy. The space gestures toward comfort, but the iconography is quietly didactic. At the top left, a bucolic barn anchors the narrative, nodding to North American origin myths and evoking a sanitized vision of rustic life. It's not unlike the sentimental topographies found in Grant Wood's lesser-known rural landscapes, absent the irony. Beneath it, a hyper-saturated photograph of coffee cherries disrupts the tonal restraint. The red is too red. This is the palette of corporate food photography, not naturalism. We are not in Oaxaca or Sadama. We are in Adobe RGB. But the crucial axis here is vertical. Each column contains its own thematic progression. The leftmost column ties the American Midwest to agricultural production. The central column, with lush branches and filtered sunlight, signals stewardship, photosynthesis, and the metaphor of growth. The rightmost column veers into ethnographic abstraction. A hand plucks fruit, a forest stands in silvery repetition. The human appears only momentarily, disembodied and deferential. This is a world made visible without confrontation. What we are seeing is the genre of the decorative didactic. Unlike the modernist muralists of Mexico or the narrative panels of East German Socialistischer Realismus, the didacticism here is aestheticized to the point of muteness. No captions, no text. It is knownness that is being sold. You have seen these images before. You understand them before you look. They are pre-absorbed. This is a visual ideology, not of commodity fetishism, but of commodity naturalization. The photographic grammar is gentle, earnest, and assured. In its selection and spacing, it echoes the quiet confidence of Bernd Notke's Lübeck altarpiece, or the rational, apolitical grids of late 20th century photoconceptualism, but stripped of doubt. These are images of certainty. To sit beneath them, latte in hand, is to be placed, subtly, persuasively, within a narrative of ethical consumption. Each flat white is rooted visually in the forest canopy. Each breakfast sandwich shadows the American barn. It is at once comforting and ideological. This is not a place to ask questions. It is a place to feel that all the answers have already been framed. Seen in the golden hour, this Starbucks, its pitched roof, fake stone facade, and immaculate black fencing, presents the viewer with a curious visual paradox, a structure both inviting and defensive. The architecture is fluent in the idioms of early 21st century soft urbanism, yet it cloaks them in the stylistic aftershocks of postmodern securitization. Let us first situate this building within the long arc of the suburban American vernacular. The faux rusticated stone exterior, a composite cladding meant to evoke hand-hewn masonry, harks back not to any particular historical moment, but to a generalized nostalgia. It speaks in the accent of authenticity without committing to any one region. In this sense, it joins a lineage of stylized storefronts that includes the clapboard simulacra of Cracker Barrel and the Tuscan-themed cheesecake factories of the 1990s. But unlike those spaces, the Starbucks typology embraces restraint. This is where the architecture departs from theater and enters the realm of affect regulation. Note the planarity of the awning, how it echoes the floating rooflines of 1960s carports, yet is rendered in a material language of brushed steel and corporate sheen. It is at once mid-century and defensive, simultaneously evoking openness and threshold. The glass curtain wall is large but recessed, ensuring visibility without exposure. The clock tower, purely ornamental, serves as a gesture towards civitas, though here it no longer tells time, merely context. Most significant, however, is the patio fencing. At first glance, the black railing might appear to demarcate an alfresco seating area, but its formal qualities are far more evocative of penitentiary architecture or airport tarmac barriers. There is no gate. There is only a strongly implied choreography. Movement here is designed, managed. Entry is not assumed, it is guided. The patio umbrellas, collapsed like unused flags, form a row of green obelisks. Their repetition mimics the kind of seriality found in cemetery architecture or minimalist sculpture, though I will not invoke Heiner Friedrich's Marfa commissions. These are instruments of seasonal shade, but when closed, they become silent reminders of the provisional nature of leisure. Above it all, the signage. The word Starbucks is rendered in a carefully spaced neutralist typeface that has long since replaced any reference to maritime history or literature. It no longer evokes Melville's Ishmael. It is now a glyph of omnipresence, a branded rune. The addition of drive-through is telling. It doesn't disrupt the primary signage, merely underlines its infrastructural reality. This Starbucks is not a destination, it is a node. This building, then, is a structure of tempered welcome. Its aesthetic is neither aggressive nor entirely docile. It is a studied compromise between local familiarity and global protocol. It invites you to dwell briefly and then to leave. As a whole, this image presents a lucid example of what theorist Sabine Schmid once called the synthetic hearth, a non-domestic domesticity in which architecture becomes a performance of care, even as its true function is throughput. There are no loitering laws here. There is only the suggestion that time, like caffeine, is best consumed in moderation. Thank you again for watching the podcast and supporting my work. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone else you think may enjoy it.